Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Rosmarijn Fens. I work as program manager for Africa Works, which is the flagship event of NABC. And I'm also NABC's country expert for Egypt. As a country expert, I'm the first point of contact for all questions regarding Egypt and building and maintaining network in Egypt and the Netherlands. Network, for example, business council, relevant government departments, private sector, and of course, both embassies. The relation between Egypt and the Netherlands might be long-standing, but it's fair to say that Dutch companies tend to look at sub-Saharan Africa for business and not so much at North Africa. This was also the case for NABC until we welcomed a large delegation from Egypt during Africa Works 2019 in April. This delegation consisted of private and public sector and was headed by Dr. Sherif Gabaly, chairman of the Africa Committee of the EBA, one of the speakers today. During Africa Works, EBA and NABC signed an MOU with the intention to increase economic ties and cooperation between Dutch and Egyptian businesses and to organize several events together. Last September, Managing Director Peter de Ruiter and myself, we traveled to Egypt for an orientation visit. This visit was organized by the Egyptian Businessmen Association. And during this week, we met with several stakeholders from government, private sector, sector committees, and it became clear how much potential there is for Dutch businesses in Egypt. Think of water, irrigation, agriculture, saline farming, but also energy, logistics. This led to the draft of a large trade and investment promotion program for Egypt, drafted by NABC, supported by the Egyptian Businessmen Association. And this is a 10-month program that consists of several activities and events, all leading up to a large conference compared to Africa Works, but then organized in Egypt, called Egypt Works. And although we're still looking for part of the funding and we are delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic, I see this webinar as the first activity of this program. And I'm pleased to see that we have got such an impressive group of speakers and a large number of participants for this webinar. And I'm sure this webinar will spark more cooperation between Dutch and Egyptian businesses and more events in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Rosmarijn Fens. We are joined now by the Ambassador of the Arab Republic of Egypt in the Netherlands, His Excellency Ambassador Ghaffar, for some more in-depth insights in the investment climate in Egypt. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Good morning, everyone. And let me first introduce myself. My name is Amgad Abdel Ghaffar, the Ambassador of Egypt to the Netherlands since 2017. I'm very delighted to take part in today's webinar. Actually, I want to thank the NABC for taking the initiative despite the difficult times that we are all facing these days. But as Rosmarijn has mentioned, we already had a plan of 10 months activities to enhance and to consolidate the business, investment, and trade environment relationship between the two countries. And despite of this exceptional time, I'm glad to see this webinar because business has to continue. And it gives us also the opportunity for us as ambassadors to explain to the business community what are the measures that our government are taking during this time in order to mitigate the negative effect of the COVID-19 epidemic on the business climate. But also I would like to express my delight to take part in this webinar alongside Ambassador Lawrence Westhoff. And we've been doing business together since we both took over this position, especially in the field of economic and investment relationship between the two countries. I would like also to welcome Chairman Eissa and Mr. Youssef from the Egyptian business community. And of course, to thank Mr. Peter Dorothy from the NABC and Rosmarijn and yourself for arranging all this together. As for Egypt, people will ask what exactly is happening in Egypt within the whole map of the COVID-19 globally. Well, according to the WHO, as of April 16, I would say even as of yesterday, Egypt has around 300 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and around, I would say, 200 or 190 cases, but also the rate of recovery is high. We almost have 820 recovered cases. Of course, all this has impacted the Egyptian economy, primarily due to the declining travel and tourist activity, also the reduced worker remittances, capital outflows, and the slowdown in domestic activity as people are asked to stay home. Of course, the weaker, on the other hand, globally, the weaker demand in the global market will certainly reduce Egypt export as well as earning from the Suez Canal, where is the flow of trade. The authorities in Egypt have taken a host of precautionary measures to improve testing as well as to limit the community spread of the virus, including setting up testing centers, imposing a partial curfew for the 2 weeks until now, and temporarily closing places of worships and many others measures. But also we have temporarily halted the air travel and the import of and the export of all types of agriculture or legumes for a period of 3 months. And we are planning to start to increase the strategic food reserve to meet domestic demands, which is big. At the same time, the central bank and the government are actively implementing measures to contain the economic implement. The government has announced stimulus policies in US dollars 6.15 billion package, which is in Egyptian pound, you're talking about 100 billion, which is almost 2% of the GDP, to mitigate the economic impact of COVID-19. Of course, I will not get into many details about these measures, what it entails for pensions, for expansion of targeted cash transfer, for social programs, supported initiative for irregular workers in most severely hit sectors. But at the same time, the big infrastructure is still continuing with different medical measures and shifts to mitigate any side effect health-wise. We are also supporting the medical professionals. We also have increased wages. We are giving a tax relief for many industrial and tourism sector, and especially for the tourism, which is already constitute 12% of Egypt GDP and 10% of the employment, and almost 4% of GDP in terms of receipts as of 2019. There is a moratorium on tax flows on agricultural land and so on. So this is in general. But before I've said this, people will ask me then, what is, as Mr. Eissa said, post-COVID-19 in Egypt? I would say we always had until, in the last 3 years with our successful implementation of the first wave of the macroeconomic and structural reforms, we are now on a very solid foundation in a way that whenever the economic activity will resume gradually, the foundations are there. Egypt will not take time. We can set off easily and quickly. And let me tell you, as we said, we implemented the first wave of macroeconomic and structural reforms, which addressed deep-seated issues and helps to stabilize the economy, sustain growth, and lay the groundwork for more dynamic private sector participation in the economy. For instance, in the financial year 2019, the real gross domestic products growth reached almost 6%, up from 5% in the financial year 2018. Of course, they are depending on the gas extractives, the tourism, wholesale, retail, trade, real estate, and constructions. These are where being the main drivers for the growth. Unemployment had decreased to 7%. So unfortunately, COVID-19 is coming in a very crucial time. But as I mentioned, fundamentals are there. The government is continuing to implement on different aspects, socially and economically and investment-wise, the work that has been done. I would like also to mention that Egypt ranking so far, before we hit all this epidemic that we are facing now, has been extremely on the increase until the last few months, until everything has globally has stopped. Most of the institutions have praised Egypt's soundness of the economic policies, which reflects on the confidence of the international community in restoring stability of the Egyptian economy. In addition to the ranking, improvement for the Egyptian economy and the International Credit Rating Agency, as most of you know, the expectations of the international financial institution with regard to the future growth rates in Egypt were extremely high. International reports contribute to strengthening the foreign investors' confidence in the Egyptian economy, which would lead to pumping more investment during the coming period, I hope, after the COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We're also joined by another ambassador, the ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Egypt, His Excellency Ambassador Westhoff. Please enlighten us about the trade relations between the Netherlands and Egypt, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for organizing this event. I think it's good to keep an eye on countries in Africa and in Egypt in particular at this moment, this difficult moment in time. I'm very happy to see Amgad Al Ghaffar on the other side. We work very closely indeed, as he mentioned. I think the Netherlands and Egypt both have an interest in Egypt doing well economically. It's important for the Netherlands that countries in Northern Africa and in the Middle East remain or become stable countries with good economic prospects. That is good politically, and it's good for Dutch businesses because we are good at exporting, hence our trade interests. Let me just say a few things about that business climate in Egypt. It's true that Amgad said that economic growth has been hit quite big, quite extensively by the coronavirus. Tourism, he mentioned, remittances, weaker demand in the global economy, and also the Suez Canal returns will go down. But still, it is predicted that the Egyptian economy will grow this year by 2%. Which makes it one of the few countries that will experience, hopefully, economic growth. So that is, I think, important to note. Another element, I think, if we look at business confidence, we also talk about confidence in government. And the confidence in the Egyptian government, I note, among businesses and among Egyptians in general, is not slowing down, and as a matter of fact is increasing during this difficult period, because the Egyptian government has taken well balanced measures in order to, on the one hand, stem the tide of the coronavirus, but on the other hand, not to suffocate the economy. And in a country like Egypt, which is not endowed with the same kind of healthcare facilities that we have in the Netherlands, and which is restructuring its economy, that is a very difficult balancing act. And still to get it right, I think, is an enormous compliment for the Egyptian cabinet and the ministers, and is truly a confidence-building measure also for those companies interested in investing or trading with Egypt. Of course, at present, trading to Egypt is something that is impossible to do swiftly because of the coronavirus. We all know that bureaucracy is very strong in Egypt, and we also know that the Egyptians are open for suggestions of Dutch companies to improve import facilitation and to lower restrictions, especially bureaucratic restrictions on importing goods, and also doing business in Egypt. But also the Egyptian government realizes that they have some room to improve there, and they listen to businesses. We are planning to have a meeting with the Prime Minister when times will be better, together with Dutch businesses to share our thoughts on further improving the business climate and the climate for Dutch businesses that do trade to Egypt. So we have a feeling that we have a listening ear and a willing government here in Egypt, and that is on the road already since 2016, when the economic reform program with the IMF started, to get Egypt back on track after so many decades of less fortunate economic decisions. So that would mean, in my view, that post-COVID that post-COVID would continue to see that trend. In that sense, I do not necessarily believe that the COVID pandemic will be a watershed for Egypt, in the sense that it will change the prospects, the business prospects, to a great extent. Of course, on the short term, you see more interest in healthcare, in online activities, all that sort of thing that we do more now and need more now. But when the corona crisis subsides, I would say it would be back to normal is maybe a big thing to say, but the focus will be again on water, agriculture, saline farming, as you already mentioned. And these are the elements that we are strong in. I'm very happy that Mr. Hans Essaadi is here, and also Mr. Tarek Elsaid from Heineken and RijkZwaan, respectively, who will weather this storm, as Dutch companies are very good at weathering storms. And also Egypt, I would say, is good at weathering storms. And when I look, for example, at the present situation with the spread of the COVID virus, we have not here the WHO declare community spread in Egypt. We're still seeing pockets that are being quarantined, villages that are being quarantined, but it's, according to the WHO, it's still fortunately manageable. And the increase in corona cases is approximately 5% per day, which is also considered manageable. So let's hope it stays that way also during Ramadan, when social activity tends to be more intense. and hopefully in a couple of weeks and months we can start looking ahead again at opening up Egypt again. But yeah, for the time being, I think we will be handicapped also in Egypt. But to the extent every company has its own experiences, so I'm also eager to learn from my friends at the Dutch businesses here present today, how they are coping with it in particular. And the last thing I wanted to mention is actually what I started out with at the beginning. The Netherlands is interested in an in the economic well-being of Egypt in general, and that's why for the next 4 years we have approximately 100 million euros of assistance to cooperate with Egypt to develop the water and agricultural sector, with a focus on women, with a focus on youth employment, and with a focus on the Egyptian expertise to bring their economy further. So these are the things that we focus on, and also these are the things that my colleague in The Hague, Moderator Ghaffar, and me are talking about on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Westhoff. Actually, you already mentioned in detail the measures that have been taken today in the Netherlands. We may hear when measures are going to be possibly downscaled. Is there already a date known in Egypt to which the current measures are there, and when things may loosen up?
Now, I think it's important that the present measures are until the 23rd of April, which is the start of Ramadan. And as I said, Ramadan is a special time because fasting is not necessarily leading to an improved, let's say, will make you better cope with diseases and may make you be vulnerable for diseases. Still, it's a very important month for Egyptians. And also in the evenings, the social events, iftars connected to Ramadan are traditionally very important part of the year. And I believe that the present government is aware that health situation dictates further restraint. And I do not expect that the government will open up the country again before Ramadan, although I'm sure they would love to, but I think they will give health situation priority over, in this case, the social aspect of Ramadan.
Thank you very much. Maybe a very brief response from Ambassador Ghaffar.
Yes, I fully agree with Ambassador Westhoff that I don't think before Ramadan there will be any easiness on the restrictions, because we are still haven't fully reached the peak, or I would say got out of the red zone. But we need to build on the success that we are doing. As Ambassador Lawrence has said, the growth is no more than 5% daily, which with the global indication is a good indicator that the government, despite the challenges in the health sector, the growth of population of more than 100 million Egyptians, we are doing well. So we need to build on these gains, and people has to be patient. And I think mostly now, and we have Mr. Eissa with us, he can give us more insight into that, are working from home as much as they can. We need very much during the coming months of Ramadan, we need to adhere to the government instructions to prohibit the social gathering in the evening. And at the end, the month of Ramadan is a month of prayer, the month of worship. So I think it all depends on the response of the community. And so far, I think the community are trying to understand that this is being done for the good case of the Egyptian, their health, and for the prospect of the opening as soon as possible, if we can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Indeed, as you already also heard from Ms. Rosmarijn Fens, the NABC is having a cooperation with the EBA, the Egyptian Businessmen's Association, through an MOU, and we're very glad to have the chairman here, Mr. Ali Eissa, for an overview of the Egyptian economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Arne. Really speaking, I want to be very short, but after I heard these two distinguished guests, His Excellency Ambassador Westhoff and His Excellency Ambassador Abdel Ghaffar, which gave us very good ideas about what is happening in Egypt. I want to thank yourself for moderating this session, and I want to thank Ms. Rosmarijn Fens for organizing this session, which I think it is very essential. For the panelists and the participants, I express my deep pleasure to be with them and to hear. I'm not here to talk, but I want to hear and to know what is going on. Really speaking, after we heard from the ambassadors, I think our government till now made a good balance between health and production, because Egypt's economy was one of the best economies, as said, in 2019. And our government, really speaking, made the balance to not to make a big depression in the economy, but in the meantime to make the social separation, which in Egypt is very important. In Egypt is very important, the social separation. We are controlling now the production in the industrial and agriculture areas. It is going smoothly, but with all the measures, the health measures had been taken in these areas. I assume with some of our panelists will give us how much restrict are these measures are taken in Egypt to continue our production with no accidents of COVID-19 to close or to shut down the production. I think till now we are very successful doing this. We have some cases in some factories that have been affected with the COVID-19, and all the measures had been taken and they had shut down for a period to be rearranged. I also want to discuss what is happening after, as I said before, what is happening after the COVID-19 being passed to go to the normal side of our lives and our economy. We want to have a very close relation with the NABC and to activate our memorandum of our understanding, which we had been signed late 2019 to be useful in the future in the recovery time after this crisis will finish. Netherlands is one of the main parties to Egypt, and for me myself, I started my business in 1975 to the Netherlands. I am exporting agriculture products, vegetable and fruits, and my first business were in 1975 to the Netherlands, and I still have links with the Netherlands, and agriculture and water management is very much in close relation between the Netherlands and Egypt. Once again, I want to welcome all of you and to hear from all the panelists what their views about this. Thank you for you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we can first go to Dr. Amr Hassanein, because I understand also he has to leave us a little bit earlier. Dr. Amr is the chairman of MERIS, which is the Egyptian affiliate of rating agency Moody's, and is also the chairman of Finance and Banking Consultants International. We're here some more in-depth insights on the Egyptian economy. Welcome, Dr. Amr.
Sure, thank you. I'm really honored and pleasure to be with this very distinguished group. We are the affiliate of Moody's for Egypt and other countries in the region. And recently, as recent as a few days ago, and also sometime before, both Moody's and Standard & Poor's have stabilized the rating of Egypt at BB rating, sorry, at single B rating, we are, it's stable with a stable outlook. We are on have been on a positive trajectory. Egypt has been on a positive trajectory for a while. And yes, Egypt is one of the few countries that is slated to have a positive growth in the coming year. I think the basic thing that we can talk about Egypt is you're talking about a big market, You're talking about 100 million people market. And interestingly enough, and contrary to what people may think in general, the purchasing power of the average purchasing power is not that low. Yes, it appears as a poorer country than others, but interestingly enough, the market is strong, pretty vibrant, and the purchasing power across the 100 million people market is not bad at all. And this is actually what used to maintain Egypt throughout various crises. Egypt passed through a couple of revolutions and still managed to survive them. One of the major factors is the depth and the breadth of the market. As we are talking now, Egypt has not followed a complete lockdown like some countries, but is following a kind of a balanced approach. The balanced approach consists of, okay, the private sector works in the morning. Some government functions are shut down, and particularly those government functions in which people may congregate a lot and crowding may happen or overcrowding may happen. So these are the government functions that have been shut down in order to avoid these crowds. Examples like the public notary, people overcrowd over there, and that's why it's shut down. Another example is the registration licenses in the traffic department. There is overcrowding there, so also it is shut down. So whenever there is a government function that requires or that where its nature is overcrowding of people, it gets shut down. So we end up with the private sector working during the day, and these functions where there could be overcrowding are shut down, and then a curfew starting 8 p.m. And why? Why? Again, to avoid the crowding in certain areas, because what happened is when the schools were shut down, the students would go to the malls, and they would sit in the mall and just congregate over there, and it became a big restaurant. You know, all the restaurants in the mall became full. So this is where the government said, no, 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 that will not work. We'll have a curfew. And then all the malls that have restaurants where people can congregate were also shut down. So as much as possible, they are trying to limit the places where there could be crowds. However, the economic activity has not shut down. As a private sector, we are working. As a private sector, we are working. Yes, we are working with measures. And I think the tendency nowadays is to go towards that, which is working with measures, going back to work, but with measures. What are these measures? Trying to have a minimum number of people in offices as much as possible, trying to have shifts, you know, so that maximum 50% of the workforce is there in order to make sure that we are maintaining proper social distancing, taking care of, as I said, the most important thing is the distancing between people and each other. So these are examples, trying to use the sanitizers and try to sanitize the workplace. So the private sector is working. The economy has not shut down, and that makes a lot of difference. And I guess this will be one of the factors that will maybe distinguish Egypt pro COVID-19. Hopefully that nothing dramatic will happen over the coming month or two. So if we continue the same trajectory as we are in, and with nothing dramatic, majorly dramatic or overly dramatic happening due to COVID-19, with what's happening in the economy right now, I think Egypt should not be in bad shape. And this is exactly what the two rating agencies have alluded to, that Egypt is reasonably able to absorb the shock and to get out of it. We will not say unscathed, of course not. Everybody will be scathed because of that, but we'll get out of it in a reasonable form.
Okay, thank you very much. I see in the meanwhile, I mean, that's a very good, very positive message. I see in the meanwhile, it looks like we have Dr. Gabaly back. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, sure, I hear it. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Please go ahead with your speech.
Yeah, okay. Well, as I said, maybe I don't know you heard or you didn't hear, but I want to talk from another. I think about Egypt and Holland and so on. We have discussed enough. I mean, the previous speaker have spoken enough about that. I'll take from the angle of the Africa and what's going on. I think, in my opinion, this pandemic and its outcome, if it stays more time and so on, and many countries will go into total lockdown and so on, will affect a lot of economies, especially the emerging economies, and especially the effect can be very dire on African economies if it remains so for another long time. So it is our duty, I think, that we have to look into how to overcome the situation in Africa. We still don't know the outcome till now, what are really the impact on the economies. But it is clear that for sure, when we look into the situation of every African country, we find, especially with the poorer ones, they will have a lot of problems. So we should work together in terms of Egypt and Holland being one of the main donors to the African countries on how to assess the situation in Africa in the coming period, and look at ways and means to try to sustain and this economies. Of course, we were looking to have a conference in Egypt in September, of course, with the organization together. And but now, of course, now the situation would not allow that. Of course, obviously, for obvious reasons. But I think that as soon as this whole thing slows down and everything comes back to normal, hopefully soon, we should work on this conference again, because then it will be more needed than before. And we work together and see Egypt and Holland, Egypt being one of the leading economies in Africa, and Holland being one of the major donors in Africa. We should look into this conference to have it as soon as we can, in Cairo preferably, okay? So I think we should be working on that and wait for the right opportunity and right time to do this. Meanwhile, both sides, I think we are assessing in Egypt the situation in Africa, and we're seeing that, for example, supply chain to Africa from, for example, I heard lately from some countries in Africa, they were receiving food from a lot of food supplies, things from India, which has slowed down lately, and this is affecting can affect dramatic situation if it remains another 1 or 2 months more. These are examples that of how things are not being, are not as before. Many African countries were exporting raw materials, which are not being, which of course is not buying raw materials today, like metals and lead, all these kind of metal products, and this oil products in some countries like Nigeria and Angola and so on also have been seriously affected. So there is a lot of things we can work on together, and I think that from your side I'm sure you have some good information at NABC which can help us, and if you want to ask anything from our side, please tell us. I think at the end, what I want to say is that we should work together and look seriously into the situation of Africa in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gabaly. So we're now also joined by two representatives of the Dutch business community in Egypt. So we'll be doing a Q&A. We'll start with Mr. Hans Essaadi. He is the managing director of the Ahram beverage company, also known as ABC, with over 2,600 employees. ABC was acquired by Heineken in 2002 and is now known as Heineken Egypt. Welcome, Mr. Essaadi.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Could you please tell us a little bit more about your company?
We're actually quite a diversified multi-beverage company. So indeed, being part of Heineken, we're into beer, but in Egypt specifically, we are representing ourselves in all alcoholic beverage categories. So that includes wines and spirits and RTDs. But most importantly, and that's where the multi-beverage comes from, we have a substantial non-alcoholic business. Two famous brands in Egypt, Ferus and Birel, that are actually representing about 60% of our volume. On top of that, we operate our own retail chain. We have 120 retail stores in Egypt, and we have our own maltery. So we convert barley that we locally purchase into malt that we locally produce, but also export to parts of Northern Africa.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you have around 2,600 employees. How many of them are currently still active?
Around 70% are still active. So 30% is at home. We have indeed a lot of people in the front line, and what we see there, and that is, I think, an issue that has not been touched upon, is how do we keep people safe? And this evolves around the PPEs, the protective equipment, varying from masks to gloves, but also sanitary material. And so one of the things that we've been working on quite hard is to make sure that we keep our people safe, and that we also create supply chains locally, but also within Heineken, to make sure that there is enough quantities of these materials.
And are there? Can you find it on the local market?
Well, specifically on sanitizer materials, happy to say that we are working now together with the military. We've donated alcohol because there is scarcity in alcohol to produce the hand sanitizer. So we have donated 200,000 liters of alcohol to be used for sanitary materials. And the military has also ramped up the production of masks, especially from 40,000 per day to 500,000 per day now in terms of masks. With that, it seems like we'll be able to get through the first phase. Obviously, and it was mentioned a few times, if the situation blows over, great, but we are 100 million people in Egypt. And so one of the things that we collectively should worry about is how do we keep people safe and how do we make sure that the PPEs, the personal protective equipment, is there in plenty quantity. Also in our case for the 70% of the people that are still working in the front line for our business today.
Mm-hmm. And in your scenarios, how long do you think you can manage this current situation?
Yeah, I said earlier that's the $1 million question. What we do see, and there's some evidence in Asia, after 12 to 14 weeks in crisis, you see that in countries like China and South Korea, that we are getting out of the crisis. Heineken being a global company, obviously with operations in these two countries, we are seeing that after around 10 to 12 weeks, really there is a ramp up. It is all very fragile, and what we need to think about together, and this is not only in the front line, but also in our offices, how do we maintain the social distancing? Because I think let's not make any mistakes. Until we have a vaccine or the virus dies down, there is always the emerging risk that when we go back to work, that the virus starts to accelerate to spread. So we have to really take precautions there and start thinking about life after COVID when we go back to our offices.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and finally about COVID before we move on to the economic situation, but how do you manage to go through this without having to lay off people?
Yeah, we proudly so. Our global CEO announced quite quickly after the emergence of the crisis that there would not be any structural layoffs globally. But it is also clear at the same time with 90,000+ people employed that we all have to make our sacrifices to make sure that we can survive. And there we have to look especially at the bottom end. So people that work in the front line, but also in our plants, that we make sure that fair wages are still there. And you can imagine that things like allowances or bonuses are no longer available because of the economic circumstances and also the business results. But we have pledged that together we will weather this storm in Heineken, and also committed in Egypt to do something similar.
Okay. Can you take us through what you've seen the years leading up to now? I mean, how has your business been operating there, and what is your expectation in the coming years if once this is over?
Actually, quite favorably, and I'm echoing some of the speakers that we just heard. Egypt, after the two revolutions and the crisis with the currency, was really on track to become not necessarily a first world economy, but very much emerging as one of the better functioning economies. Also, as a result also of government intervention there, which we see as positive. So the situation was more and more positive in that sense, with the challenges that we all know and still see. The population growth remains a concern. I think water and the availability of water, but also in more general commodities, it being an import country, remains a concern. But we were, until very recently, very positive about the outlook for Egypt, and also our business in that sense was performing quite well.
Thank you. You already briefly mentioned the challenges. Of course, we have a lot of people listening in who, may eventually want to become also commercially active in Egypt. What are the things that are still difficult in Egypt? What are the challenges for you?
I think said also by Mr. Westhoff earlier, the bureaucracy in Egypt is there and is something that you really need to understand. So I would encourage anybody that comes to Egypt to do business to partner up and to make sure that you really understand local dynamics. There is a formal and an informal economy, and that has its challenges and dynamics, and you really have to understand that in full. On the other hand, and I think that is where then the opportunity is, it's a big country, that once you establish yourself and you're being respectful for local dynamics, then there is many opportunities also in Egypt.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Essaadi. Let's now go to a totally different sector, the seeds sector. RijkZwaan is a Dutch company and long-time member of NABC, very active in Africa, North Africa as well. So we're now joined by Mr. Tarek Elsaid, who is the country director of RijkZwaan in Egypt. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your kind invitation and for all participants for this fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about your operations there?
Locally, I mean, it's we talk about the both levels, locally in Egypt and also in Holland, Dutch level. You know that we are a subsidiary for the Dutch company. We are working here in the Egyptian market since 2009, so now almost 11 years. And our headquarters in De Lier in Holland, and partially also another part for research and development in finance. When we start already this crisis, we see that already there will be there was some symptoms and early indication about this crisis. We as you know that we are a hybrid vegetable seeds company, very old, since 1924. So it's already, I mean, we are very specialized in this business. We have already normally we have the shipments, which is already scheduled, which should be shipped every month. We managed to have, let's say, an early actions as a precaution, just to import all the shipments, which should be planned to come in on April, May, June, just to secure our local stock here in Egypt. That was a very early step that we did at the beginning of the crisis. Secondly, also that it's from the local level and here in Egypt, we are splitting in two parts and two departments. One for the sales reps and the technical people who are already working in the field with the growers, with the distributors, and also with our exporters. Our recommendation from the beginning to stay at home and just go for just only in the very critical, let's say, meetings or discussion if there is a delivery, shipment, or cash collections or checks, or let's say making the commercial deals. That was a part for the outdoor force. And for the indoor, I mean, and for the administration, we are working, let's say, almost with the 50% of the staff day by day. So the 50% are working today and the other 50 for the second day. That was also another early action, also to reduce the number of employees in the office. In our station, you know, that we have our research and development station, trial station in Cairo Alexander Desert Road, where we are already testing all our varieties before launching into the local market. We have there almost a big number of our local labor who are staying in the farm. We close it and also we block all the temporary labor who are coming from outside, and do all the precaution as the same as the gloves and the sanitizers and the masks. That was another action from here. From Holland already, that we are really, our supply chain department and logistics were really very helpful in that, to prepare and make an early preparation for the coming shipments for the coming 3 months. Because what we found that already the normal time which we took for the release, the shipments, it was almost extended for a longer period due to the, you know, that already the government and the people already in the custom, the airport, and the Ministry of Agriculture are not working with the full capacity.
I see.
So,
I see.
we are talking about 50%. So let's say, just to give you the clear figure, for the normal time to release the shipments from starting from shipping from Holland until I receive it in my local stock, it took almost from 40 to 45 days in the normal time. Now it reached to almost 60 to 70 days. So you can imagine this let's say that this is extended on the time. It was for sure delays of shipments, but with the really good help from our department in Holland for the preparation and also finishing all the shipments, we couldn't have, let's say, these early steps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And
sorry. The next question is, because I understand you can still continue your operations, your business. Does it also mean that food scarcity is not something that may happen? Do you think the agricultural sector as a whole is still continuing?
Yes, we think that, you know, that the seeds specifically, it's let's say the very early step on the food supply chain. And it's very, very important for sure, because the seed is the first first step on the whole agriculture process. So we are not, we can say clearly that this sector will continue work, and we will not face that let's say shortage of the food, but maybe we will have, let's say, a changing on the behavior and the type of behavior also, and also the map for plantation, especially for the crops which was already allocated for export. Talk about some crops, specific crops, the blocky pepper, melon for export. It will be affected negatively because there will be no enough demand and consumption for that, especially because that big part of the production was going to the restaurant, hotel, and also some for the export, especially for the Europe or Gulf countries. This kind of crops will be switched to the local crops for local consumption.
So there's indeed a change in the varieties which are popular.
That's right.
Okay, before we go to the next question, I do want to say to the participants indeed that if you do have questions, please feel free to write them in the chat option, because then we can have some interactive discussion. Of course, also when it comes to, you know, normally most people or a lot of people do attend our events because they like matchmaking, they like to get to know other people. In this case, it's slightly more difficult, but if you do want to, you know, share something, share who you are, why you're on this webinar, what you're interested in, please use the chat option as we're going towards this last part of this webinar. Mr. Elsaid, actually also the same question to you. Of course, we know Egypt is a big country, big market, but sometimes also seen as challenging by foreign companies. Can you also tell us a little bit what the challenges are that you experience and how you manage to mitigate them?
The challenges almost, let's say, with the same line about some process, the operation, which is we face some bureaucracy in especially with the government. For example, that already our trial station is already our ownership, and we spend now more than 1.5 years just to register this land, because it's 100% owned by the Dutch company, the RijkZwaan Holland. And we're still working on that with our international lawyer firm. That takes a lot of time. Okay, all of our documents are fulfilled, our portfolio is complete, but this process is really taking longer time. Other part is already what we are facing, especially with the registering the varieties with the Ministry of Agriculture. It takes still a longer time for what we are expecting. We are also asking many times already for the registration department and the ministry that to confirm that not importing unregistered seeds, because it's when we registered our variety already with the ministry, we still any other company can import under the name which we registered, but it was different. So it's a little bit still we have that argument and let's say, the traffic emails between our side as a private sector vegetable seeds company, and also Ministry of Agriculture, represented by the Center of Agriculture Research Institute, and also registration department. So this is one of our main challenges really here. But the rest really, I mean, we were really very optimistic about that, especially with our new minister. We really make many sessions for, let's say, have the interactive discussion with the private sector companies and what they are willing and how we can improve and develop the business process.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Ambassador Ghaffar, maybe you could say some concluding remarks about today's webinar.
Thank you very much. Once again, I would like to express my appreciation for all the participants today. It was very useful during this time to convey a positive message to the business community on the both sides, that the governments and the business community are trying their best to mitigate the effects. Business is as usual, but in a different way, that we should build as we mentioned, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, and as has been confirmed by Ambassador Westhoff from Cairo, that the gains, the good path of recovery that Egypt has been achieving since 2013 until today, with the confirmation from the financial rating agency, from the IMF, from the business communities themselves, has been successful. Fundamentals has been established, has been going on there, as Mr. Hassanein also has mentioned, that we are not worried about that the post-COVID, even during the COVID, that the recovery, the Egyptian economy is really able, have all it takes to achieve a very easy and very smooth recovery, building on the achievement that we have been done. But what I would like also to mention and need also to convey to the both business communities in Egypt, and especially to my colleagues in Cairo in the Egyptian business community, who I want really to commend for their great achievements since they participated last year in NABC Africa, and the memorandum and the vigor and the activity that Mr. Sherif Gabaly himself has taken. This is something very important, and I would like really that you both, the NABC and the business community in Egypt, the agency, to gather efforts in the coming time to continue the plan that we have already put into that we have approved for the coming 10 months. Finance, I don't think should be an obstacle. The NABC, as we have met, I really commend very much their strategy, their view, and you are achieving. You are really, I would say, connecting both communities and facilitating. Let's put it this way: facilitating, because business has already been there, but we need to connect the vision that Mr. Westhoff has mentioned. The Dutch foreign ministry, the Dutch government has already set a plan for 5 years for 100 million euros for specific sectors in agriculture, in irrigation, and so on. We need to link the business community. We need to make them aware of all these plans. Egypt also has its own economic plan. We have Vision 2030, which I advise everyone to go to the website and have a look at it. It covers all sectors in order to achieve a sustainable economic growth for the coming, let's say, 10 years. All these are coming together really to achieve one aim, is the sound and sustainable economic growth in Egypt. Business community is there. I don't think finance should be an obstacle, and we need more of joining efforts from both business community and from agencies like the NABC, which I really commend again for taking the initiative today to do this webinar. And I hope in the coming weeks and the coming months, we will continue our connection and to see and to revisit the situation. And we are here as government, civil servant, as ambassador to answer all the questions. Thank you very much.
I think we're coming towards the end of today's webinar. We already had heard the closing remarks of Ambassador Ghaffar. Maybe an Ambassador Westhoff, if you have a very final word to say for us.
Well, thank you very much. No, I would fully concur with what my colleague in The Hague said. This is a good moment to recognize Egypt's efforts to grow economically and sustainably, and even during crises like these, manage to stay on the right track. Well, if that does not bring some confidence for Dutch businesses, then what does, I would say. So happy to be able to share that with all of your participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Then we have come to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank you very much all the speakers of today, the ambassadors, and of course the Egyptian Businessmen's Federation. Thank you so much for today, and association, I should say, rather, sorry. Thank you very much for everything today, and have a great rest of the day.